audience to this session. I have excellent experts here with me to answer questions that we're like to discuss with you. I'm going to be just making some brief statements. Jurisdiction is the holy grail of cybersecurity, to be very honest. If we four would be able to solve the issue of jurisdiction, or we all together in this room today, we'd made a major step forward. I don't think this is going to be possible. And I think what we need to do is we need to distinguish between two topics. There is the topic of jurisdiction, which is usually related to crime, to criminal investigations, to cybercrime. And there is the more broader topic of cooperation. Cooperation can take place outside of any criminal field. It can be cooperation in cybersecurity, exchange of information. So we'd like to address both topics. They're intertwined, but I'd like to separate them for a moment. And I'd like, as a criminal law professor, to maybe make one comment. There are a lot of people who say jurisdiction is one of the key problems, one of the obstacles to successful fight against crime, against cybercrime, and ensuring our security. I like to caution you a little bit. Jurisdiction is what we understand when we're saying there are limitations to the authority of an enforcement agency within a country. So the enforcement agencies in Saudi Arabia will find their limits in general at the border. That means if a crime is happening outside the country, they will not be able to enforce it unless there is certain agreement of cooperation in the criminal field. There are very few cases where you want to claim jurisdiction outside your borders. These are very, very rare cases. And in general, jurisdiction and the limitation to jurisdiction serves an important purpose. It allows us to have different criminal law systems in the world. It allows you to criminalize things which are not criminalized in other parts of the world. And cooperation in general finds a limit if countries have to work together and they realize we're not talking about a criminal offense in both countries. If one country criminalizes something, the other country does not criminalize it, the possibilities for cooperation in criminal matters is very much limited. Therefore, if we had jurisdiction, or one of the conditions for closer cooperation in criminal matters is actually that we would align our criminal law systems as well. We would criminalize the same things. Okay, that as a general remark. We have excellent experts here, and I'd like to pass on the question to Bernardo, maybe from Interpol, as you are one of the organizations that is closest associated with the first part, fighting crime. What's your view? What is hindering effective fight against cybercrime? Is it the problem of jurisdiction, lack of cooperation in general? Is it missing criminalization? What's the issue?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. I'm honored to be here representing Interpol. This is our third year participating in the Global Cybersecurity Forum, so I'm thankful to be here on behalf of Interpol. That's an excellent question. I think it hits different points. Jurisdiction is a big problem. Cyber is not your traditional crime area where you have law enforcement responding to a crime, initiating evidence collection, interviews. The jurisdiction is in the country and in an example of traditional crime. In cybercrime, it's global. You know, it transcends borders. You could have a cyber criminal operating in one country, you could have infrastructure in another country, and then you could have victims in a third country. So it's very complicated navigating that environment in the law enforcement community, and that's where Interpol comes in. We have 195 member countries around the world. Each member country has a national central bureau, which is the way that Interpol member countries communicate. So our role is basically to collaborate and bring countries together to look at cybercrime, in particular how to exchange information across jurisdictions. And then when we see there's a lack of perhaps capacity or knowledge in cybercrime, then we do capacity building where we set up programs to train law enforcement around the globe on fighting cybercrime.
Can I just follow up with a brief issue? As you are working with so many different countries, do you believe that culture is an issue, that we have a lack of cooperation in certain areas because of a lack of culture, or is it just that we're lacking an international instrument that we have in other areas, for example, organized crime, where we have a UN convention? What's the difficulty?
Well, the difficulty can be cultural. For our cybercrime program, we recognize that we can't treat every country the same. We have 195 member countries. Cybercrime is unique. There's some similarities. But as was mentioned, there's different legal frameworks in different areas. So we look at a regional model where we break the country up, the world into different regions, and focus on providing our support for that particular region, looking at the challenges that they face and the threats that are important to them. And I think that's the unique way that we have been handling this issue as far as collaboration. The Budapest Convention, I believe, is 22 years old next month. Obviously, a lot has changed in 22 years. We have a lot of advancement in technology. Interpol has been heavily involved in the UN ad hoc committee process. We're there to serve as the global law enforcement voice. Obviously, this is negotiations between countries to establish a new way of working, which can be challenging, obviously based on a lot of geopolitical conflicts. But we're hopeful that by us being part of this forum, that we can give a voice to the law enforcement community, which are the ones that actually have to do the work. A lot of countries are represented by diplomats and maybe not the people that are actually going to be using the mechanisms that are being negotiated at this point.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Albert, before I come to you, one issue. It was last year's forum here where we discussed the UN approach towards cybercrime, the discussion, negotiation about a convention. I think we were all hoping that at this stage we would be at a different place. The negotiations were not as successful as we were hoping here last year, with a lot of encouraging comments for this. Let's see where this is heading. The process is not over, but it's definitely at a difficult stage. Albert, with your experience, taking this beyond just jurisdiction, the question of jurisdiction, going into cooperation, where do you see the key challenges at the moment, and where do you see the solution for the discussion in cybersecurity field?
Prof. Marco, thank you for the question. But first of all, on behalf of my country, the Republic of Ghana, our appreciation to the Kingdom, to the National Cybersecurity Authority in particular, for extending an invitation to us. This is the second time participating. This is the last time I was with my minister, and I think it's been exciting. We appreciate the hospitality of the Kingdom. I think the issue of jurisdiction, sovereignty, cooperation is an important one whenever the subject of cybercrime comes into the picture. Prof, I think you alluded to the issue earlier. Traditionally, not just law student, but once you came across jurisdiction, then understand is a physical space, isn't it, with a certain boundary. But in the cybersphere, how do you then define the jurisdiction? When somebody could be in Saudi Arabia and still be able to commission an act targeting IT infrastructure, certainly in Ghana. These are some of the challenges that we've seen in this particular area. So digital transformation is now interrogating the concept of jurisdiction as the law applies. Of course, if you're talking of cybercrime, then the law is also very important here. But Prof, one area of difficulty is also attribution. Is another huge area. Beyond the techniques of IP spoofing and others, even the advent of artificial intelligence, I think we are interrogating how do we establish attribution when AI-enabled systems are actually behind certain crimes. So it's a kind of important discussion. From our perspective, Ghana as a developing country, I think we are heavily dependent on consuming technologies which are hosted elsewhere. Those the issue of data localization. That also, raises its own question: data governance, data protection, and how to lawfully access data to support criminal investigation. Well, of course, I think at the end of the day, the question you raise is also the variability of domestic legislation, because if you have the concept of jurisdiction implicates a law governing that particular space. And that has been a challenge in terms of legal harmonization, that a particular cyber act will be designated as a crime in Ghana, and that same act will also be seen as a crime in another jurisdiction. I think the world is moving towards that angle. Ghana is a member of the Budapest Convention, which Bernardo mentioned about. It's among a few African countries, about 6 or 7, which are signatory to this, and we've also signed up to the African Union Convention, just to address those sort of gaps. But Budapest Convention membership is just about 60, but it has been a good foundational international cooperation instrument. And I think I also wanted to add up to the UN resolution that has necessitated negotiations on international treaty to counter the use of ICTs in cybercrime, which Ghana has been participating. So I do believe the world is moving towards that direction, but we are not moving quicker. Hackers move with the speed of light. But the bureaucrats, whether the EU, African Union, or the UN, the pace by which we are, and I've sat, as a technical person, I've sat in negotiations, sometimes you get annoyed. We need to move, because you see the issues happening. You see the ransomware. You see the organized criminal network acting. And you expect the world leaders to also act in a manner that is equally giving that sense of urgency to address the issue. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. But I do believe, I'm quite optimistic that recent developments at the regional level, at the sub-regional level, but the international level is moving us, because we do not have a choice. I think it's an imperative that we find international cooperation arrangement. Of course, we can't agree on everything, but the baseline understanding and mutual mechanisms of cooperation is required to be able to address cybercrime as a transnational crime in this particular manner. Prof, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. So you see again, there is great unity in the call for some kind of closer cooperation and having those frameworks in place. Shrek, so it's a pleasure having you here with your experience. So we would like to benefit from this. When you're looking at cybersecurity, and again, going beyond only the issue of jurisdiction, which is a more legal thing, but cooperation. If you're looking at the region, if you're looking at it globally, what's the path forward? How can we get to a closer cooperation that we're not standing there and just looking at crimes and attacks happening, but that we can respond in due time?
So I do see cooperation on the ground. So we cannot just say it's negative all the time, but there is real examples of successes. For example, we had a case where there was child abuse, online child abuse, stemming from Bahrain to the UK. And the cooperation between the Kingdom of Bahrain and United Kingdom enabled us to cooperate, track, monitor, and collect the evidence necessary to prosecute the criminal in the Kingdom of Bahrain. The collaboration is a tool and allows us to resolve our problems even if we don't have jurisdiction. We can make it as difficult as we would like it to be, and we can simplify it if we choose to simplify it. But I think there is the intent between countries to resolve certainly certain crimes that are common to all of us. And I think as human beings, seeing people being abused is something that we all reject. Seeing crimes committed across the border is something that we all strive to stop. And I think establishing one-on-one relationship is one way of solving that problem. But also we have international corporations and regional corporations. For example, the GCC has the GCC agreement there where we can, any crime that happens in one country, we will support another country in investigating and resolving it in all online crimes. And that's the kind of collaboration you want. You want interregional, international, and maybe cross-regional agreements. So if we do not need to wait for the international community to agree. So the GCC can work with the African Union as well so that we can harmonize our cooperation and utilize each one's jurisdiction to resolve that cybercrime. So we don't need to wait for the UN to solve our problem. I think we can have it happen at a regional level and cross regions. And then eventually, maybe the UN will catch up.
But that's a very good point. I think it's important to highlight that I had the pleasure of working with a lot of governments in different parts of the world. I've been in Africa. I've done a lot of work with countries here in the region with the GCC. There are those instruments in place already. We see it. We had the former president of the European Commission here. So in the EU, there is regional cooperation. The Council of Europe member states, there is regional cooperation. We have it in Africa. We see that there is a great degree of cooperation in GCC. We see it also in Southern Africa, Southern America, and the OAS there is a cooperation. So we see those regional instruments. What is currently still lacking is the global dimension that is adding something to it, as cyber threats are truly global. Bernardo, I would like to ask you again on one of the issues. How about the private sector, the public-private partnership? Can that add to it? Can that, even if there is no legal framework, no global legal framework in place, can the fact that we have those large international, multinational companies that are based in the United States, for example, help law enforcement agencies around the world to get access to data that they need, even if there is no legal framework in place?
Sure, absolutely. We at Interpol have a project called Project Gateway, where we connect with the private industry, public-private sector. We have 13 companies that have signed on to this agreement. And the idea is to exchange intelligence. Obviously, these big companies are protecting their clients, but they hold a lot of the intelligence that law enforcement needs to move forward an investigation, to identify different threats. So this collaboration that's been ongoing with Interpol and these companies have allowed us to provide that intelligence to countries to act on it. The idea is to have actionable intelligence where countries can actually take action on cyber threat actors that have been identified. So we recognized early on that as law enforcement, especially in cybercrime, companies, big industry hold that data that we need. They have the expertise, the tools, and what we need to do is leverage on that. And it would be not just for the benefit of the companies, but obviously for the benefit of our member countries around the globe.
So did you want to add to it?
No, I thought
Oh, okay, but I'd like to have your view on this issue as well, because there is an opportunity, certainly, with global companies supporting the work of law enforcement or the fight against cyber attacks. Is this something that we need to enforce, where we need a forum like this one, where we need to involve the industry and ensure that there are maybe global standards, a protocol, something, even if it is not legislation in place, that there is some kind of mechanism in place that we can improve this cooperation with nation states? For example, if you need to access data in the United States, do you have the right tools, or do you believe this needs to or should be improved?
I think that is a difficult ask, because there are legal ramifications to that. If, for example, private sector companies took action or shared information they were not supposed to, for example, take Europe, that's part of GDPR, and by sharing information without the consent of the companies or the information owner, they can be sued. So, and I think there needs to be some kind of protectionism given at the global level, or at least at a regional level, to the information shared in cases of cybercrime. And we can focus on just that aspect of it and minimize the risk that they have to bear from a legal perspective, and so that they cannot be sued from the information owner or from the governments in the region.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. I still remember discussions with law enforcement agencies at the time when cloud services started to pop up, and they were really afraid that they said, we will not be able to go to the premise of the suspect anymore and seize material there because they're all stored in the cloud, and that makes it significantly more difficult for us to get access to the material. However, after a short period of time, they realized, okay, but there is a centralized cloud provider, and instead of having to search at the suspect's premise, I can simply call the cloud provider and say, give me the data, and I don't even need to enter the suspect's premise. So there are certainly two sides to each of the issues. There are opportunities and risks. I'd like to discuss a little bit the way forward. We only have 9 minutes left. I'd like to try to look out. Where do we need to put the focus? Do we need to do it on the national level? Do we need to solve the issue there? Where do you see where we should take action, where the focus should be? It can be, again, as we did last year, call for the United Nations to take action. It can, however, also be to say, okay, let's clean up our house first and make sure that we have the instruments.
Prof, I think there is interrelationships around us. You can't address this issue just only at the international level, at the sub-regional level, without looking at the domestic level. So I think at each level, we need to make some tangible progress. Certainly, the minimum is at the national level, you need a legislation that is fit for purpose. So for example, Ghana in 2020 passed a Cybersecurity Act that tried to address some of these gaps. You need to. I think as a rule of law country, that is a baseline that you need to. Of course, the alignment with the sub-regional instrument is also key. And I think from my region, ECOWAS has got instruments on cybercrime to facilitate collaboration. It is needed. At the African Union level, working with Malabo Convention, the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity, and of course, at the global level. I don't think we should be overly ambitious with expectation of what to achieve at the global level. But I think at the domestic level, at the sub-regional level, there is that opportunity to agree on basic cooperation framework that we can address this issue. And I think it's an evolving situation, there's no doubt. And my last example, what the refusal or the difficulty for countries like Ghana to access lawful access to data from the big tech firms is leading to what we call, data governance and and sovereignty. You are likely to do a domestic law that will compel service providers, institutions to rather invest in keeping their data within the country instead of keeping them out. So I think the environment is opening up. And I think, linking to the private sector issue, I think the private sector needs to be aware of what is happening and cooperate with states so that we can make progress in this particular area.
I mean, you heard during the opening presentation, and those of you who are following the discussion already knew before, that there is now a GCF Institute. And maybe that would be something that the GCF Institute could look into and have a look at different frameworks that are already there, different ways of cooperation, and maybe to see if it is possible to build upon this. Maybe we have to get back to the drawing board when the negotiations in the room don't work. Bernardo, there are different areas that we're associating with cybersecurity and cybercrime. From a perspective that was discussed here very frequently of critical infrastructure, there are attacks against critical infrastructure, but that's not the only problem. We can go all the way down to for example, child sexual exploitation material, which was mentioned here by Sheikh Salman before. So what are the areas where cooperation works, where you see that's something where it's happening frequently and it's happening routinely at a high speed, and where are areas where we're finding it more challenging? Because I think this is really important. If you're a provider of of critical infrastructure and you're realizing chances for cooperation are limited, that's where the pressure starts to build up.
From an Interpol perspective, the cooperation that we see that happens pretty quickly is anything having to do with children. Obviously, that's important. Anything related to child sexual abuse material is almost immediate. Everyone collaborates, everyone works together, including private companies, obviously given access of their information to law enforcement to take action. I don't see that as an issue. I think the issue that we're seeing is when you look at a ransomware attack, how are countries working together and exchanging information? A lot of times what we're seeing, and is a tendency in law enforcement, is keeping things to themselves and not sharing with other jurisdictions that potentially can help mitigate the attack or find a way to attribute that attack to an actual person. So I think we need to work together in a better way, a more organized way. I think this is where Interpol plays a big role. We're a neutral organization. We have 195 member countries, like I mentioned, around the globe. We're not taking sides with one country or another. Our idea is to facilitate that exchange of information, but it has to come from a place of trust, and I think it's inherent in law enforcement that we don't trust each other, so we need just to do a better job at that.
That's a good word, almost a good final word. We met here twice. This is the second time we're meeting. When we're meeting again, if we're meeting, inshallah, next year, what will have changed? What are you hoping for as a realistic target? What could we have achieved over the next year when it comes to cooperation? Do you think there is anything where you see there is going to be a breakthrough, or do you believe it's the small things that you do not necessarily see on a daily basis where agencies are working together which will make most of the difference in this year?
So I see two things. So with regards to ransomware, we've seen 40 countries sign up for cooperation in order to not only stop paying ransomware, but actually sharing critical information about decrypting certain information. Now, if the whole countries started sharing how to decrypt that ransomware and sharing those keys, we would have less crime. That trend I can see happening. I see greater regional cooperation, so inter-regional cooperation between, say, the GCC and the African Union or South American countries. This inter-cooperation will also enable us to better respond in probably sometimes with the support, obviously, of Interpol, allows us to move faster. And I think that's what we should see. More inter-organizational established relationship to rapidly respond to these attacks. Yes, cybercrime related to children is an emotion that everybody supports and the laws support it, but we need to extend that as well to ransomware that can destroy organizations and the livelihoods of individuals and companies globally.
Thank you so much, Albert. If I can ask you if you can make a 30-second wish. You only have here we go.
In fact, I was going to ask you, Prof, thank you. Ghana is hosting an international event later November, the Global Conference on Cyber Capacity, being organized by the World Bank in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, GFC, also Cyber Peace Institute. We are expecting close to 1,000 international delegates in Accra. And the team is capacity with Ghana's vision to lead cybersecurity on the African continent. And we look forward to see some of you if you receive your invitations already. Other than that, we'll also be happy to engage on this going forward.
Thank you so much for basically inviting the people in the room over to the next conference, which would be definitely a pleasure. The only thing I can do is I can carefully close this session, this panel, by thanking the panelists, thanking the audience. I think we have seen that there is already progress that maybe we do not necessarily focus on when we're only looking at the big global developments with the discussion about the UN Convention being stuck. We heard various examples of successful regional corporations that we can maybe learn from. We've heard that there are areas where cooperation works because everybody's interested, like the protection of children, where we've heard from successful examples where this cooperation takes place. Do I personally wish for more? Do you think we should wish for more, that we get this broad approach? Yes, I think it's realistic, but maybe on the way there, we need some more research, getting back to the drawing board, and maybe the GCF Institute can play a role there. With this, I would like to thank you all, and please enjoy the rest of the conference, and maybe see you all in Africa.